Cameras are on. Okay.
Yep.
All right. We're back again, everybody. I was going to hang on. Two props real quick. Don't forget, most important thing you can have is spray alcohol right now that you can clean your hands with while you're out and about touching elevator buttons and doorknobs and all that kind of shit. And if you can get your hands on masks, cover your face with something. This isn't going to go away for a while. Frankly speaking, you know, from the fact that COVID-19 is active and expanding in in places outside of the northern hemisphere. It's already active in the southern hemisphere, which is summertime already. Which means when our summertime comes, don't count on this going away. There's no proof yet that it goes away in the summertime. All right? And if you think about it, and you know, this may not go away for a while. This could change humankind for a while. The way we all deal with what we deal with in our daily lives everywhere we are. I mean, you know, everywhere we are, things are going to be a little bit more different, and you're going to have to maintain vigilance and caution. And like I said, don't assume that because you chant, you're protected. So please take those steps to keep yourself healthy. Week before last, I had read the Garden of Life chapter from The Human Revolution, which I had wanted to do for years. And I got a really good old friend. By the way, Danny, thank you for joining us tonight. You too, Joe. And everybody else that joins us on Wednesday nights. But my good friend Rob is one of the many people that I know that are going through incredibly difficult times now. You know, a difficulty that I'm not sure how I would deal with it. You know, I don't know if I could be brave enough or strong enough to withstand some of the things that I know people are facing right now. Joe, it's another, you know, situation like that. There's a lot of what seem to be impossible situations right now. And I just wanted to say that, you know, I had talked to my friend Rob, and he had said that he had really gotten a lot out of the reading from the Garden of Life chapter. And he actually, I didn't find it until tonight, bro, that you'd sent me those epilogue, the epilogues in book 2. It's right here at the last thing, the cherry blossoms of spring, yada, yada, yada. Exactly what you just sent me from the World Tribune. Pardon me. Epilogue. Here. Yeah. Cherry blossoms danced in the wind as if bidding a final farewell. This is President Toda's funeral. That's where this all ends. I've decided that while we're out for COVID-19, since this is really, you know, this disease could be likened to a world war. It's ravaging everywhere with the same kind of fierceness that an actual war might. And people are losing loved ones as they do in war. And they're losing them unexpectedly as they do in war. And society is being impacted and crumbling to some degree as it does in war. So, you know, the thing about me reading this that you have to understand is, I want to read, this is just short of 2,000 pages. Okay, so I'm not going to read it all tonight. And I'm not going to read it all at one time. But I am going to starting next week, I'm going to read it all. I'm going to start from chapter 1. I'm going to skip backwards this week because I wasn't really thinking I make the determination to read the Human Revolution for everybody. But I did, so now I've done it, I'm going to do it. So tonight I'm going to read from volume 1. It's actually volume 2. Okay, so the way this is actually book 1, book 2. Okay? This is book 1, this is book 2. There's 12 volumes within this 2-book set. Volume 1 goes from volume 1 through 6, book 1 goes through 1 through 6, book 2 goes 7 through 12. Okay, and then epilogue. Okay, so I will next week start reading book 1, chapter 1. Volume 1. I'm going to start from the beginning, okay? I'm going to start from the beginning next week. I'm going to go ahead and read what I got to read tonight. I got to let you know, though, that when I read this, I cry. And I apologize in advance if I get so emotional that I'm overcome and I have to stop, or I have to gather myself because I feel like I was there. I mean, I don't know what it is about this guy, but President Cato writing about President Toda, it's just, let me share this with you because this is good shit, man. This is really good stuff. All right, so this is the Overture chapter from Volume 2, and I will start from Volume 1 next time. But tonight, let's go. I'm going to read this straight through. It's 13 pages, so hopefully I don't cry so much I take too long. Here. First thing it says, top of the thing. Listen to this and compare it to now. The times change. Moment by moment, like the current of a mighty river, they never halt, not even for an instant. It was a new era was underway. On November 3rd, 1946, Japan's new constitution was adopted. It represented a radical departure from the constitution of the old Japanese empire, the so-called Meiji Imperial Constitution, which had vested absolute authority in the emperor and ushered in the rise of militarism. The new constitution incorporated radical changes, specifically the well-known Articles 1 and 9. No one could have dreamed of the far-reaching influences these changes would wield in the future. It is doubtful if even the leaders of those days, MacArthur and the 44th and 45th Prime Ministers, Kijuro Shidehara and Shigeru Yoshida, fully realized their implications. Article 1 states, "The emperor shall be the symbol of the state and the unity of the people, deriving his position from the will of the people with whom resides sovereign power." So this was actually a declaration that the emperor is a symbol of state and that the sovereign power resides with the people. That's a huge change from the emperor as a god. Okay, right? All right. And then Article 9 states, "Aspiring sincerely to an international peace based upon justice and order, the Japanese people forever renounced war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes." First constitution ever that incorporated, that kind of a concept of pacifism into it. In order to accomplish the aim, at the next to last paragraph on page 170, in order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of the belligerency of the state will not be recognized. So government can no longer declare that they're going to go do a war. The people have to vote and say, yeah, we go with you. The government no longer has a right to initiate conflict. The new constitution, often referred to as the Peace Constitution, dissolved the emperor's authority for warfare. The declaration of public sovereignty was a matter of course in view of worldwide political trends. The dismantling of the imperial system surprised no one either. Everyone had secretly expected it for some time. But the permanent renunciation of war came as a shock. I mean, this is the Japanese nation. They've never been afraid of war. Article 9 voices the idea of absolute pacifism. Its adoption in a warlike nation such as Japan created a very strange situation. There is endless controversy as to whether this clause was forced on the people by the GHQ or initiated voluntarily by the Japanese government, though ultimately that is not important. It's in their constitution. Even the Constitution, the fundamental law of the land, is altered by people according to the times. Everything in the world is transient. Think about that right now. What's going on right now? Everything's changing in a month, 5 weeks. Everything's different already. Even the Constitution, the fundamental law of the land, is altered by people according to the times. Everything in the world is transient. Anyone who fully realizes this cannot help seeing the need for a supreme and constant ideology based on the fundamental and eternally unchanging laws of Buddhism. Early one morning, around the time the new Constitution was made public, Josei Toda lay in bed thinking. Contemplation in the hours before dawn was a habit with him. A noisy scratching sound came from above the ceiling. A family of mice. Lively bunch, he thought. Their playful scuffling was a reflection of a definite improvement in the Toada's food supply. The household had been so poor for the past few years that even mice avoided them. The no-war clause had struck Toada as faulty from the start. The procedure by which it was brought about had been hazy and mysterious. It seemed to have appeared out of thin air. His train of thought, now again, this is a Japanese man, this is someone from Japan post-World War II, reflecting on this in this way. It seemed to have appeared out of thin air. His train of thought had turned automatically to what form of government could best realize the ideals of the new Constitution, when he was struck with a sudden hopeful inspiration for the future. Capitalism cannot do it, he thought, and neither can communism. Our state of affairs eloquently testifies to that, and so will any in-depth study of historical trends. No matter what social system we adopt in the future, no matter how democratic its political structure, it's bound to be ineffective as long as human beings themselves fail to change. We're threatened by nuclear holocaust, but we still don't have the guts to renounce war. Truly, humanity's made a poor show of it. We may have all the good intentions in the world, but just let some bad influence stray across our path and there's no telling what we'll do. That's the way human beings are. And therein lies the limitations of our so-called great statesmen. One can hardly believe they can uphold the no-war clause forever. Right now, this Article 9 is meaningless, though it does express the heartfelt prayers of those who know firsthand the misery and cruelty of war. Translating it into action is going to demand a wholly new, unprecedented political ideology. What is it then? In contemporary terms, we can say that both capitalism and communism represent the boundaries of human understanding. But the political systems based on these doctrines are dragging us inexorably toward World War III. Despite humanity's common desire for peace, war has been made inevitable. No matter how much they compromise or copy each other's better points, neither materialism nor spiritualism will bring us world peace, as we all know very well. What we need is a new ideology to embrace and guide both materialism and spiritualism. That is the Daishonin's philosophy of the oneness of body and mind. I'm certain of that. Applying that ideology in itself is Kosen Rufu. Now again, I apologize if I start to cry as I read this stuff, but to me this shit's really kicking home here. Applying that ideology in itself is Kosen Rufu. Applying that ideology in itself is Kosen Rufu. It will enable a new kind of politics based on absolute respect for the dignity of human life. That's what we're shooting for, everybody. When a new form of government is founded on this teaching, the Constitution will gain wholehearted public support and be recognized worldwide as a document of absolute pacifism. And at that time, this small corner of the earth will wake from its ancient nightmare to a true and lasting peace, secure and ablaze with hope. Top of page 173. The seemingly empty clause that had appeared out of nowhere somehow appealed to Toda. It was proof that Kosen Rufu would first be achieved in Japan. Wow, think about that. The Gosho clearly states, at the time when the law has spread far and wide, the entire Japanese nation will chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo just as surely as an arrow aimed at the earth cannot miss its target. Thinking of the 5 conditions that determine the spread, the fivefold conditions for propagation. Thinking of the 5 conditions that determine the spread of philosophy, he saw that 3, time, country, and maturity of human understanding, were already right. This was all in the selection of time, everybody, that I've already read on the other web thing that you can always find. Thinking of the 5 conditions that determine the spread of philosophy, he saw that 3, time, country, and maturity of human understanding, were already ripe. All that they wanted were the other 2, the teachings and their sequence for propagation. But who could see that beside himself? Even if he spoke out, no one would believe him. Toda tossed around in bed a while and then lay still, breathing deeply with his arms folded across his chest. He thought hard about the next memorial service for his mentor, Tsunesaburo Makaguchi, and the first post-war general meeting of the Gakkai, both of which were fast approaching. On November 18th of the preceding year, they had held a memorial service at Kankiryo Temple in Nakano, honoring the first anniversary of Makaguchi's death. At that time, he had resolved to hold a general meeting on the second anniversary, and the date was growing nearer and nearer. Pardon me. Segue. The mice resumed their bold scampering above the ceiling. Hey, you mice, don't push me too far. He roused his memories of the past year's struggle. Gradually, the Soka Gakkai was regaining its strength. Listen to this. Few remained of Makaguchi's 3,000 disciples. Some had been evacuated from Tokyo. Some had dropped out. Still, one by one, he had seen to it that they were informed of the memorial service. Word arrived of those who would visit Tokyo to attend. So now what did that tell you? He roused his memories of the past year's struggle. Now the past year would have been 1 year after this is the first year out of prison, right? Gradually the Soka Gakkai was regaining its strength. Few remained of Makaguchi's 3,000 disciples. So the Soka Kyoiku Gakkai, which I always mispronounce, and I'm so sorry. The Soka Kyoiku Gakkai, pardon me. The Soka Kyoiku Gakkai is President Makaguchi's entity, okay? And it got transformed by President Toda into the Soka Gakkai because he didn't want to have it focused just on education, all right? Because the Soka Kyoiku Gakkai was a group of educators. It was specifically for educators. It was like, if you're not an educator, this is really for educators. You got to be kind of a brainiac here. Okay, so here he goes. Again now. He roused his memories of the past year's struggle. Gradually, the Soka Gakkai was regaining its strength. Few remained of Makaguchi's 3,000 disciples, which is again saying that there's a transformation of the type of faith. These were now Toda's disciples that were sticking. Do you understand? Makaguchi's had become older. They already had an opinion of understanding what they thought they knew. They're not really part of this process of the enlightenment of Toda in prison being projected into society as the basis of the Soka Gakkai's practice and behavior. That's why this is the Soka philosophy, everybody. Okay? Some had dropped out, still one by one. He had seen to it that they were informed of the memorial service. He made sure everybody was respected. Word arrived of those who would visit Tokyo to attend. The ceremony was held a day early on November 17th in the lecture hall of the Education Hall in Kanda. A large photograph of Mr. Makaguchi hung directly above the rostrum. The interior of the lecture hall evoked many old recollections, having often been used for general meetings of the Soka Kyoiku Gakkai. When they caught sight of the photograph in that familiar place, people trembled with inexpressible emotion. Now you can imagine, they've all gone through the freaking war. They've lost the war. President Makaguchi has died in prison. Mm-hmm. And President Toda, who wasn't the most stand-up guy prior to the war, has now taken it upon himself to resurrect everything Makaguchi was doing. No, I'm going to expand it way beyond anything Makaguchi was doing. Everybody with me? I say everybody, there's 2 of you here. Mm-hmm. When they caught, the people trembled with inexpressible emotion. The second floor balcony was almost full. Between 500 and 600 people were present. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock in the morning with gongyo. One by one, they lit incense in Makaguchi's memory. And if we've, Sobo, you've ever been to a funeral, we all take a little piece of incense, right, and we drop it in, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, one by one, they lit incense in Makaguchi's memory. Bottom of page 171. Retired High Priest Nichiko Hori, our hero, 59th in the succession. The guy that gave us all of the material that became the Gosho that we read. Okay, so he led the chanting of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Beside him sat Chief Priest Taie Horigame and Chief Priest Hosui. Memories of Makaguchi from the old days and his tragic death in prison caused waves of profound feeling to sweep over the participants. Many could not restrain their sobs. Thank God I'm not going to start now. I can feel it. Okay, good. I'm probably not going to cry like I did. Okay, good. Memories of Makaguchi from the old days and his tragic death in prison caused waves of profound feelings to sweep over the participants. Many could not restrain their sobs. The hall filled with the smoke of incense and a grief so acute it was almost palpable. When the ceremony ended, Toda took the rostrum. High Priest Hori approached Toda and whispered something. Toda nodded and turned to the audience. We will now have some words from the High Priest. Retired High Priest Hori approached the rostrum and removed a paper from inside his robe. Facing the audience, he spoke. He was short, but reminiscent somehow of a sturdy old tree. He had thick white tufts of eyebrows and eyes that sparkled from time to time in his ruddy face. I came here to Tokyo in spite of my old age because I heard that so many disciples of the late president were gathered to hold a memorial service. I have the profoundest admiration for your gratitude toward your late mentor and the sincerity in which you cherish his memory. From a high priest of Nichiren Shoshu, qualifying Mr. Makaguchi as being the mentor, and that these people that were in the audience were his disciples. Not having a problem with stating the obvious. I have no time now to go into the relationship between Mr. Makaguchi, myself, the Soka Gakkai, and so on. But I believe that the late president's spirit of total dedication to the spread of Buddhism reveals a profound understanding of the Daishonen's last will. The Nirvana Sutra was the final teaching of Lord Shakyamuni. It contains many admonitions to his disciples so that they might continue their faith after his passing. One passage of this sutra states, and he proceeded to quote from the annotations of the Nirvana Sutra by the great teacher Chang'an, who was the disciple of Tentai. Everybody knows this one. If one befriends another person but lacks the mercy to correct him, one is in fact his enemy. One who rids the offender of evil is acting as his parent. In other words, those who looked on idly while Buddhism was dishonored were not true disciples. They merely pretended. Makaguchi could never stand by and see that happen, Hori asserted. He was one of those rare believers who, as stated in the Nirvana Sutra, stood up himself to oppose the slander of Buddhism, as each one of us should be willing to. That's why this is written down for us to know. That's the example that's left behind to show us correct faith. That's what we should be willing to do as well. He was one of those rare believers who, as stated in the Nirvana Sutra, stood up by himself to oppose the slander of Buddhism. Our founder, Nichiren Daishonin, was a man of infinite mercy, he continued. Throughout his life, he courageously praised the benefits of the Gohonzon and protested false beliefs. President Makaguchi was a layman, but he far surpassed the priests in the greatness of his mercy for society and for the nation. This is from the 59th High Priest of Nichiren Shoshu, this praise, this assessment of Mr. Makaguchi's life. Shakyamuni's last teaching, Chang'an's interpretations, and the will of Nichiren Daishonin were his personal credo. What are Shakyamuni's last teachings? The Lotus and the Nirvana Sutra. Yes. What are Chang'an's interpretations? all of the teachings we know as Tintais.
Mhm.
Okay, profound meaning, great concentration and insight, and okay, and words and phrases. All right, and the will of Nichiren Daishonin. What's the will of Nichiren Daishonin? Widespread propagation. Kosen Rufu. Everybody chants Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you, baby. He brought Buddhism to all kinds of people, high and low, and never slackened in a moment in his merciful efforts for propagation. In its consequence, he was misunderstood by the authorities and ultimately gave his life for the supreme law. It's the same in any age. The one who abandons deceit and treats others with genuine compassion is bound to incur hatred. It's the same in any age. The one who abandons deceit and treats others with genuine compassion is bound to incur hatred and malice. About 30 years ago, I edited an account of the Asahara persecution. After that, I compiled and edited another 150 odd pages of historical material on persecutions of Nichiren Buddhism for the last volume of Essential Writings. This is again retired High Priest Hori. They include the three all the people that died for Buddhism, for the Daishonin's Buddhism. They include the three Asahara brothers who were beheaded in 1279, 4 believers from Shimosa who were beheaded in 1706, a priest, Kishin, who died in prison in Murakame in 1757, Takeuchi Hachiemon, who died in prison in Kanazawa in 1786, Kando Nichijo, who died in prison in 1797, and Kazusaya Zinroku, a parishioner of Zozaiji, who died in prison at Denmo-cho, among others. These priests and lay believers gave their lives for their faith. Those who were imprisoned or exiled number several thousand. The book divides these persecutions into 100 general categories, but they do not even begin to compare with those that Mr. Makaguchi suffered. In terms of their scope, significance, and the extent of their influence, both inside and outside Nichiren Shoshu, Makaguchi's were infinitely greater. Now, retired High Priest Hori has just qualified that out of all these people that have given their lives, that Makaguchi's sacrifice was infinitely better, because he essentially died of starvation as a result of all of this, okay? If I had the opportunity to revise the work, I would definitely record the struggles of Mr. Makaguchi, Mr. Toda, and dozens of others as examples for posterity. I hope all of you will share the same determination as Mr. Makaguchi to fight courageously toward Kosen Rufu for the sake of our country and society, and leave your names along with his in the immortal sacred history of Buddhism. So I'll read that all to you again, because this all applies to everybody that's listening to me read this right now. I hope all of you will share the same determination as Mr. Makaguchi to fight courageously toward Kosen Rufu for the sake of our country, your country, and leave society, your society, and leave your names along with his in the immortal sacred history of Buddhism. He finished his speech and immediately sat down again. He was never much for ceremony. The vast growing Soka Gakkai organization of today, this is President Keita commenting now, was built on a noble history of struggle against persecution. We should offer our heartfelt prayers for those pioneers, the sincere bodhisattvas of the earth, who have gone before us. 10 years later, Mr. Hori, Essential Writings of the Fuji School was reprinted. True to his word, High Priest Hori included a section on the persecutions of Makaguchi in the Soka Kyoiku Gakkai. Next was Chief Priest Horigami, who had been especially close to Makaguchi. He spoke in his normal, quiet fashion. Today's ceremony brings back my old memories. At one time in my life, I met with Mr. Makaguchi every week for 5 years. We studied the writings in Buddhism together and devoted ourselves to faith. He was seeking to perfect his philosophy of value, which I 2 weeks ago I was talking about President Toda writing his philosophy of life as sort of a reflective response to that. Through his faith, he could at last fully realize that theory in his own life and communicate it to other people. I cannot help pondering the immense effort that fulfillment required. The answer he sought opens the way for people everywhere. Makaguchi found it alone and then passed it on. He was a rare individual in that he arrived at the ultimate principle of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo through the study of value. This is a chief priest talking about how Makaguchi attained Buddhahood. The philosopher's quest that had led him to the core of Buddhism. The philosopher's quest had led him to the core of Buddhism. Horigame praised President Makaguchi's exemplary life, which had embodied both philosophical speculation and dedicated practice. Chief Priest Hosoi spoke next. He explained how modern Shintoism had begun with scholars like Motouri, Norinaga, and Hirata Atsutame, who maligned Tentai and Nichiren Buddhism, regarding Buddhism as their personal enemy. They were followed by a host of other intellectuals who perpetuated their distorted views and so summoned disaster for the entire nation. In conclusion, he stated, Japan fell because of false beliefs. Today, society continues to degenerate, dragged down by the wrong ideas of scholars. As fellow members carrying out the will of President Makaguchi, I hope you will deepen your understanding of the tenets of Buddhism and spread them throughout the country. Another message to all of us. Then I hope you will witness an era of responsible scholarship that will recognize what is valid and what is not. And you can't unless you study. The hall was now totally silent. No one even coughed. We will now hear the memorial addresses, the moderator announced. First to be called was Kizo Iwamori. He had been a leader of the businessmen among Makaguchi's followers. When Makaguchi had been carried from the prison gates in death, Iwamori was one of the few who attended his lonely funeral. He broke down in tears as he described the serene and noble look of enlightenment on the deceased president's face and ended his speech by saying, until the last, he showed us actual proof. Iwamori was followed by Yoshizo Mishima and Takeo Konishi. Facing Makaguchi's photograph, they related their memories of the late president. Over and over, they voiced their gratitude to him and vowed their commitment to the future. The teacher had passed on, leaving his forlorn and grief-stricken followers. Next, 7 of Makaguchi's followers rose in turn to speak with great emotion. The troublesome Yozo Terakawa was among them too. Most seemed to be apologizing to their mentor for having abandoned their faith during the war. Kyuichiro Masuda had also come all the way from the interior of the Nasu Mountains to beg forgiveness of his departed president. These were people from all walks of life, educators, businessmen, former delinquents, farmers, and others. Each had known President Makaguchi in his own way. Now, as they paid their respects to the man they had looked up to as their lifelong teacher, they experienced a renewed sense of personal loss and reaffirmed their determination for the future. At the very end, Toda stood. He addressed his deceased mentor as though speaking to a living man. I remember it was September 9th, 1943, when they took you from police headquarters to Sugamo prison. It was the last time I was ever to see you. All I could say was, "Take care, Sensei." He made no reply, only nodded. But in your eyes I sensed a boundless mercy and courage. Pardon me. Soon after, I followed you to prison. You were old, and I prayed night and day to the gods that they'd release you as soon as possible. Perhaps my faith was lacking, or more likely, it was the Buddha's infinite wisdom. But on January 8, 1945, I learned from the interrogator that you had returned to Eagle Peak. How could I describe my grief and loneliness? I lost the staff I leaned on and the lantern that guided my feet. Night after night, I remembered you with tears streaming down my face. Up until now, Toda had fought back the desire to weep. He tensed his body and was silent a moment. Pardon me, while I do the same. Muffled weeping filled the hall like the sound of a distant surf. Some endured their grief in silence. Others dabbed back their eyes with their handkerchiefs. Katsu Kayohara, neatly clad in black, also stifled tears. Toda continued, raising his voice, as though he's speaking to President Makaguchi. Out of your infinite mercy, and you've heard me, President Toda has quoted this in previous lectures. Out of your infinite mercy, you allowed me to accompany to prison. The Lotus Sutra states, those persons who had heard the law, dwelled here and there in various Buddha lands, constantly reborn in the company with their teachers. I feel that I truly share an eternal bond with you. Through this blessing, I came to understand the original mission of the Bodhisattvas of the earth, and to realize, even vaguely, the meaning of the Lotus Sutra. What immense fortune this was for me. When the Soka Kyoiku Gakkai was at its height, I avoided becoming your successor. In many ways, I sought to avoid my responsibility. I was not worthy to be your disciple. Please forgive me. Unworthy as I am, during my 2 years suffering in prison, I resolved to give my life for Kosen Rufu. Please look at me. Despite my lack of understanding and ability, I am determined to follow your will and fulfill the mission of the Gakkai so that I may deserve your praise when I see you again at Eagle Peak. Your disciple, Josei Toda. Fudge. That's faith, folks. That's faith. That's the determination of a Buddha. That's a determination of a Bodhisattva of the earth. That's my example. I hope it will become yours if it isn't. He folded his address. Wiping his tears, he placed it on the altar. The memorial service was over, but the excitement did not abate. Faces glowed as though in a gust of fresh air. Those united in the cause of Kosen Rufu were stirred, not by the sorrows of the past, but by the overwhelming determination for the next battle. High Priest Hori and his group withdrew after a brief pause, followed by the other priests. After an hour's recess, the first general meeting of the Soka Gakkai was opened. The memorial for President Makaguchi ended. After an hour break, they started the first general meeting of the Soka Gakkai. It was a concrete first step, a truly fitting overture to Kosen Rufu. With the end of the war, leaders from groups in every sphere of society were released from prison. In their own way, all of them started over. But the Soka Gakkai was built neither for honor or profit, nor for worldly ambition. It was setting out on the road toward the noble ideal of Kosen Rufu, Nichiren Daishonen's Kosen Rufu. There could be neither a profounder nor more beautiful fresh start than this. After the opening address, Director Kitagawa reported at length on the history of the organization. The last general meeting had been held in the spring of 1942. This was the first year since the war. After a lapse of 4.5 years, Kitagawa recalled the difficulties of those intervening years and went back farther to the founding of the Soka Kyoiku Gakkai in 1930 by Makaguchi and Toda. Its formal inauguration ceremony in 1937 with 100 members attending, the publication of its magazine Value Creation in 1941, and the spirited discussion meetings of the propagation campaign. In retracing the course of the organization's growth, he spurred the members on toward the future. Next, a new organizational plan was announced. 9 departments were set up, including the Bureau of General Affairs and the Study Department, and those in charge were officially appointed. 15 new chapters were formed, 10 in metropolitan districts and 5 in rural areas. A year after the war, preparations for a sweeping advance were steadily taking shape. About 200 new members had joined since January, with Toda taking the lead in propagation activities. We think of hundreds of thousands and millions, right? This is back with 200. We got 200 new members, man. We've doubled in size, okay? Excitement arose among the several hundred participants as the general meeting progressed. They listened with all their hearts and at times broke into thunderous applause. Toda was happy. He could not feel it. Toda was happy, but he could not feel at ease knowing that there was that. Pardon me. Toda was happy, but he could not feel at ease knowing that he was responsible for the driving progress that must continue from here on. It says in the Gosho that when people hear of Buddhism, their faith flares up like fire, but if they drift away, their spirit falters. Faith, like water, means to practice unceasingly. Toda prayed inwardly. It was all he could do. He prayed that somehow each person present that day would hold fast to his or her faith throughout life and that no one would fall behind along the way. Personal experiences, and President Ikeda feels exactly the same way about all of us. Personal experiences followed one after another, seemingly without end. Some 15 people spoke for nearly 2 hours. They included men and women of different ages, occupations, personalities, and academic backgrounds, speaking in a variety of local dialects. It was truly impressive. They told of strange, incredible happenings that they had experienced on the front or after returning home from the war. Some recalled near-fatal accidents while fleeing Tokyo after the Gohonzon had burned in air raids. One teacher had left Tokyo when the school children were evacuated, spoke of chanting all night for a pupil suffering from a critical eye infection whom the doctors had given up as hopeless. The child recovered completely. Someone else told of escaping death in the flames of incendiary bombs by desperately chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. One man related how his family, crushed by the despair of unemployment and poverty, had resolved to commit suicide together. Just as they were chanting their last farewell to the Gohonzon, he recalled that Mr. Makaguchi had once said, "It's important to start again." Changing his mind, he devoted himself earnestly to his faith, and as a result of his efforts, built a small but comfortable house for his family. People who don't know about the Gohonzon may say that they cannot believe in miracles. But when they see these so-called miracles keep happening over and over to countless people, what can they say? Buddhist philosophy is a science of life that reveals the law of cause and effect. The valid testimonial stirred the listeners' hearts. They felt the general meeting signaled the rise of the Daishonin's Buddhism from the rubble of the war after a silence of several years. Though the meeting was a long one, no one gave a sign of irritation, perhaps because their own lives were torn by so many overwhelming problems. Hearing the 15 testimonials, they could not help feeling a surge of renewed courage and self-confidence. If others had done it, why couldn't they? If the Gohonzon was true, they could experience the same actual proof for themselves, and you can too.
Yes.
The day's events were long, but no one grew bored. The atmosphere was charged with enthusiasm. After guidance from 2 or 3 leaders, Josei Toda finally rose to speak. The applause were deafening. Some were on the verge of tears. The clapping continued as though it would never end. From their response, he knew they had placed all their hopes and trust in him. He would speak in very plain, simple terms, he thought. Long ago, in his letters to his disciples, Nichiren Daishonin often set down the difficult principles of Buddhism in phonetic symbols. So common people could understand them, rather than classical Chinese. Other priests of these days were captivated by esoteric Chinese characters of Tentai and, in their lack of understanding, ridiculed the Daishonin. Even today, many phony intellectuals pose as scholars by toying with abstruse theories. What counts is that the people understand. What counts is that the people understand. The one who can guide them in the simplest, most concrete way is the truly superlative scholar. Toda spoke quietly with his old familiar smile. You might think loss and gain are the domain of gods and Buddhas. Today especially, they seem to be competing to see who can dole out the most benefits. But no one is clear about what benefit really is, wouldn't you say? So what he's saying is that post-World War II, okay, Japan, the missionaries have come. Everybody is praying in whatever way they can pray for recovery. So he's saying, you might think loss and gain. You might think the people that are doing better or worse are being helped by either gods or Buddhists. All right? He says, especially they seem to be competing to see who can, because everybody's saying, oh my God, my Buddha, right? Amida, no, it's, whatever. He's saying, but no one is clear about what benefit really is, wouldn't you say? He poses this question. So what he's trying to clarify, if you go into society right now, there might be other people that are saying they're finding religion as a means to combat the reality of society as well. He says, but he's saying, so then he brings it back to the question, but no one is clear about what benefit really is, wouldn't you say? Are gain and loss solely for the gods and Buddhists to bestow? Hardly. People have experienced gain and loss each day since the beginning of time, with or without religion. All that differs is the nature of that gain and loss, great or small, profound or superficial, honorable or degrading. A fisherman, for instance, goes out to catch fish. If he succeeds, that's gain. If he fails, or if, say, his boat's getting damaged, that's loss in terms of his livelihood. Or take the man who sells stew at a roadside stand. If he has lots of customers and makes a profit, that's gain. But if a rowdy customer knocks over his stand, or if he doesn't have any customers and his overhead increases, that too is loss in the sphere of his business. These gods, no doubt, offer their own kind of gain and loss. A fisherman experienced gain or loss as a fisherman, a stew vendor as a stew vendor. The audience wore expressions that seemed to ask, well, isn't that obvious? What we must bear in mind, President Toda continues, what we must bear in mind is that a business investment of 100 million yen carries a far greater potential for gain or loss than an investment of 500 yen. Myoho Rengekyo is the one supreme function that embraces all phenomena of the universe. It is the ultimate principle of life itself. The gain and loss that appear in a life based on Myoho Rengekyo are completely different in nature from those deriving from shallow or distorted philosophies. Gain or loss is really what you accomplish with the event. Do you understand what I'm referring to? Our previous conversation a little while ago? Loss isn't loss unless it affects your life as loss. Things that seem to be lost can actually be gain. What has President Toda been talking about all this time? Gain. What he gained in prison because he followed President Makaguchi there. He gained that in prison. All right? What we must bear in mind is that a business investment of 100 million yen carries a far greater potential for gain or loss than an investment of 500 yen. Myoho Rengekyo is the one supreme function that embraces all phenomena of the universe. It is the ultimate principle of life itself. The gain and loss that appear in a life based on Myoho Rengekyo are completely different in nature. Why do they happen? In nature than those deriving from shallow or distorted philosophies. A life based upon Myoho Rengekyo will be blessed by immense and inexplicable benefit. So you must understand, everything that occurs to you is immense and inexplicable benefit, waiting for you to reveal its true nature based on how you accommodate that, right? unexpected happy events will occur. On the other hand, those who oppose or slander the supreme law will, by the law of causality, suffer frightening loss. The Lotus Sutra clarifies this in great detail, and the lessons to this effect in the Daishonin's Gosho are too numerous to count. Our beloved Makaguchi faced persecution for the sake of the law, the people, and society. All Buddhas of the past, present, and future shall praise him. Those who slander him, slander the supreme law. They invite devastating loss and deserve our deepest pity. Those who slander the Gakkai, a band of disciples of the supreme law, how can they escape reprisal? His voice was fiery and vehement as the lion's roar. Toda declared his overwhelming conviction that the fortunes of those who criticized the Soka Gakkai would suffer obvious decline, as expounded in the Gosho and the Lotus Sutra. The hands of the clock stood past 5:30. To Toda, this first general meeting signified a break with the old Soka Kyoiku Gakkai. The revolution, the salvation from suffering that is the purpose of Buddhism, could not be aimed at the educational world alone. He also abandoned the old methods based on the philosophy of value. He also abandoned the old methods based on the teaching mechanisms of Makaguchi. He set out in a new way. Okay? Understand? All right. He also abandoned the old methods based on the philosophy of value. He was determined to reach every corner of society, to plunge heart and soul into the midst of the country's 100 million unhappy citizens. I'm almost done. Toward this end, he had poured his full efforts into a grand memorial service for his mentor, and then immediately reorganized the old society as the Soka Gakkai. These were his intentions behind the general meeting. A little more than a year had passed since his relief from prison. He felt confident that he had positioned the new organization squarely on the starting line. He was satisfied with the day's results. From now on, he'd have to control and speed their advance, sometimes encouraging them, sometimes scolding. Not only the Soka Gakkai stood on the starting line. That same November, the defeated nation emerged from her 3,000-year history to start over with a new constitution. Outside, it was already dark and cold. A few leaves fell from the Paulownia trees, which had survived the bombings. One falling leaf heralds the coming of autumn. Toda rejoiced inwardly, sure that the time had come to march toward Kosen-rufu. Several young people followed him on the way to Suibodobashi Station, looking as though it was their greatest joy to follow a man of honor. All were shabbily dressed, but they were the driving force of the future, which they cherished in their hearts like a precious jewel, pure-hearted, vigorous young people. Toda was happy. They sang the youth division song, not knowing who was leading, oblivious to the confused noise in the street. When the waves of pomp and glory roll by, and the revels of ambitions close, false doctrines fade away, the light of Buddhism glows for eternity. My friends, the long-awaited hour of Kosen-rufu is at hand. To arms, young warriors, ablaze with passion, lifting the banner of the law, arise. Okay, and next time we'll start from the beginning of Volume 1, Page 1. Okay? Thank you. See you then. See you next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.